Welcome to today's episode of Chronicles of a Nigerian Woman. I am your host, Fagbeja, and today I'll be reading Chizoba's story. Most times, people can't really relate with the issues that NGOs and activists agitate about. I think it's because the numbers that are quoted seem like statistics to them, but I am not a statistic. I am a real person and a victim of female genital mutilation. I was circumcised and I would like to share my experience. I spent the early part of my life in the village with my grandparents because my mother had me out of wedlock while she was still in school, and her parents took me so that she could finish school. My parents later got married, but I was about 7 before I left the village to live with them in Lagos. My grandparents were educated to a level. My grandfather was a teacher and the headmaster of the primary school in our village, and my grandmother was a tailor, so we lived quite well. My mother was the only girl and the last of their 5 children, so I and one of my older female cousins were the only children with them. I was about 4 years old when my grandmother and her older sister took me to be circumcised, and it is a day I will never forget. I was taken to the house of an old lady who lived just outside the main part of the village. A few other girls, accompanied by older women, were waiting as well. But as soon as we got there, my great aunt called out to Nwanne Nursi, and she came out to usher us in. She took us into a room where I was stripped and laid on a bed. My legs were spread apart and tied, and my grandmother and great aunt held each of my arms on either side. The last thing I consciously remember was Nwanne Nursi bringing out a fresh blade and cutting me as I screamed. When I woke up, I was at home, and my grandmother was mopping my forehead with a wet towel. I felt intense pain in my genital area and I started to cry loudly. My grandmother kept trying to pet me, but I was in too much pain. My grandfather had traveled to Umuahia for a meeting and would not be back for 2 days, so there was no one else with us as my older cousin had gone to school. For the next 2 days, my grandmother applied some herbs to my genitals in the morning and in the evening. Using the toilet was torture, but she explained that it was something every good girl had to do, and my cousin said she had also been through it. I was young, but the memory lingers on. When my grandfather got back, I was still ill and running a fever. When he heard what had happened, he was angry with my grandmother for taking me to get circumcised. I overheard them arguing. She insisted that it was because he had not allowed her to get it done for my mom that she had me, and that she would not allow the same thing happen to me. At the time, I did not quite understand what they were talking about, but it stayed with me. I had to be taken to the hospital and I was admitted for a few days. I now understand that I had got an infection. When my mother came to visit that Christmas, she found out what had happened and she cried so much. My grandfather tried to console her, but she was really upset and angry with her mother. I thought she was upset because it had been done in her absence. You may think it's strange that I remember all these details from when I was 4, but I have been told that it's because of the trauma. I really realized how different I was from other girls when I went to boarding school at the age of 11 and had to take a bath in the general bathroom. But it was when I got married that I understood the full import of what had been done. I was a virgin when I got married, but my husband was not. First of all, I had to deal with the fear I had about anything touching my genital area. I was so scared, and he was understanding, but it took me almost 2 weeks to finally calm down enough to consummate our marriage. When we finally did, he told me he had never seen anything like that. He said it didn't matter to him, but I felt somewhat inadequate. I had read a few books to prepare me for sex before I got married, and I hear it's meant to be pleasurable, but I don't feel anything, and I never have in my 12 years of marriage. I spoke to a counselor when I was still having difficulty overcoming the trauma I felt at the thought of having sex, and at least I got comfortable with that. But I do it more as an obligation than for pleasure. My husband has really tried to get me to enjoy it, but I don't care much as long as he is fine. Now that we're done with having children, he is not comfortable with that anymore, and it's starting to affect things between us. I am scheduled to start sessions with a sex therapist soon. I just can't help but think that all this could have been avoided if I had not gone through that traumatic experience. And so, when I lend my voice to the fight against female genital mutilation, it's not because I just want to make some noise. I am not just a statistic. I am a real woman living with the consequence of this ugly practice. What are your thoughts about this practice of female genital mutilation? You can also find some resources below that can help if you have been a victim of this practice or you know a community in which it is still being practiced. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and to turn on the notification bell so that you don't miss any of my videos.